So don't leave me, baby. Don't leave me, baby. Talk to it. And it's house, just take a home. And it's time.
And here we are again. Bridge City Radio 100.7 FM, KCLA. I am your host, Victor Bustillos.
I'm DJ Tricks, also known as Frank Contreras.
And here we go again. Very, very honored to have back in the studio Senor Error Sound himself.
Greetings, everybody.
Supa K.
That's right.
So for those of you who may have not heard or seen our last show, we had Supa K in the studio and he was blessing us with a nice foundation set. A lot of Studio One stuff going on there, a lot of stuff that I love. And today, you know, he's so knowledgeable, man, and there's so much stuff that he knows about reggae, and I felt that we had to have him back and we had to talk with him and just pick his brain, you know, find out who Supa K is and what does he love and what does he do and et cetera, et cetera. So how you feeling today, Supa?
Oh, great. Thank you for having me back on the show tonight. I appreciate that. I know this is kind of the back and forth interview part, so hey, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, man. Well, I think we'll get straight from the beginning, man. So what kind of music did you listen to when you were a kid, man? What was your first favorite music? Had it always been reggae, or were you listening to what did your parents listen to?
Well, you know, I don't know if it's a generational thing. I could never really get with my mom's music too much. You know, I remember listening to the Art LeBeau show and then later listening to Earth, Wind and Fire. You know, I guess I just wasn't old enough to appreciate that kind of music. You know, yet now later, many years later, now I do. But I guess my first like personal interest, you know, my mom had bought me this little Mickey Mouse. It was actually Mickey Mouse, a Mickey Mouse record player. It was like the little arm, like
oh yeah,
the
little finger with the needle on it.
Exactly. She bought me my own records, you know, the little read along records. You know, I'm a kid of the '70s, so you know, she had bought me those. I had my own little records, you know, to listen to soundtracks and Disney records and stuff like that. And that was my first contact with anything vinyl or music, you know. But as far as my first genre of music, you know, being a kid of the '70s and coming into age during the early '80s, you know, I was around and I was at a young age, you know, when the new wave scene was hitting LA, and you know, we first started seeing things on the news and TV about this new shocking thing called punk, you know, with these kids with the mohawks and all this, you know. I mean, that was kind of an alien thing for me even at that age. Like, wow, look at these crazy people on TV, you know.
Yeah.
What's this all about? And then, you know, later on, probably the first music I ever really got into and actually sought after, it wasn't even reggae music, surprisingly, but it was heavy metal music, you know, metal, you know.
Wow.
It was
I never would have guessed it.
Mm-hmm.
It was heavy metal, you know, and I mean, I you know, the '80s, the big groups, Rat, Def Leppard, Quiet Riot, those kind of,
Right.
but that was rather short-lived for me, you know, because I don't know, just my changes, you know, at a young age, I guess it's maybe the same thing for a lot of people, or I guess I should just speak for myself, but you know, I listened to that. I liked it, but just was something that wasn't there for me that could keep my interest for a long term.
At what age
Right.
was this? At what age was this where
What are we
metal
talk-
came into
What
your
are we
life?
talking about? Like 12, 13.
12 years
There used to be a local radio station on Long Beach called KNAC 105 point
KNAC.
something. Yeah, that was out of downtown Long Beach. I think that's where they were. And you know, that was a big thing. And at that time, you know, the big hair bands were around at that time and filling up the Long Beach sports arena on a regular basis. You know, I mean, that kind of thing. I was that, you know, that was like my first contact. Well, okay, well, there's people who kind of make a life and lifestyle around music, even if it was that, you know, like. And that was rather short-lived, you know.
Did you live in Long Beach, or were you born? Where were you born at?
Actually, I was born in Long Beach.
Wow.
I was born at Long Beach Community Hospital there, right real close to the traffic circle. And then I grew up and I was raised primarily in Wilmington, not far from here where we're at tonight. And I grew up between Carson and Wilmington, between those two cities, so I'm
Okay.
very familiar with the South Bay Harbor area. This is where I grew up. I got a lot of family ties here. From both my mom and my dad's side. My dad's side of the family goes back to the days here in Pedro, even before the bridges were built. When you used to have to take
Yeah.
Wow.
when you used to have to take a ferry to go from here
Yeah.
here to Long Beach. I don't know
Wow.
how many of you are familiar, as far as the listeners, with this area and kind of the lay of the land here. But yeah.
Good. So you're definitely native to the area, to the harbor area.
Oh yeah, to the harbor area,
Good, man.
Wilmington, Carson. Yeah.
Oh, good, man. So from punk music, you were about 12 years old, born and raised in Long Beach. Yeah, your mom and your dad. Did your dad listen to Art LeBeau as well, or
My mom and my dad were divorced at
by that time?
when I was at a very young age, and punk actually came later.
Okay.
Later, I was probably in junior high, Wilmington Junior High.
Yeah.
By that time, when punk was a thing, and you know, I had got into that, and hip hop was a big thing at that time. I'm
Right.
talking like the golden era of like Def Jam Records, that kind of thing. Slick Rick, Public Enemy. I mean, I loved it all.
Yes.
LL Cool J, the Beastie Boys, and
Yep.
those kind of groups. I mean, that was big. I remember, I wasn't even old enough to go there, but I remember hearing about that Def Jam Super Tour they had.
Yeah, the
And
Fresh Fest
the Fresh Fest
in Long Beach.
in Long Beach, and that's where the news had got a hold of gang violence, and they started
Yeah.
associating rap and hip hop music
Yeah.
with that, over that one like super tour that had like everybody on it, like
Wow.
PE and Slick Rick, and I mean everybody who was anybody was on that
Right.
tour for
Wow.
Def Jam, and that's kind of like where a lot of promoters started to not really want to deal with hip hop or rap, or in their venues, and that whole thing, public like media controversy kind of thing started from that incident, those
Wow.
incidents right there, and
Was that at the Long Beach Sports Arena or the Long Beach Civic Center?
it was at the sports arena.
Yeah. I was
yeah.
going to go to that concert. A good thing I didn't go. My cousin actually went, but he was telling me how people were being thrown off the balcony. That was actually
Wow.
the Raising Hell concert,
That was
Oh,
it.
man.
1986.
Run DMC, and
Houdini, Run DMC, Timex Social Club, Houdini.
Wow, 86, huh?
86,
Yeah.
I believe.
Wow.
yeah, that incident, like nationwide, I maybe even go as far as say worldwide, like changed the face of hip hop and how the media and how the music industry kind of approached that and dealt with those artists and those labels that put that out. And I was really too young to have attended anything like that, but I that's when hip hop and rap turned into like a kind of like this
Yeah,
rebellious kind of
Yeah.
thing.
exactly.
So is it safe to say you were into hip hop and rap after punk, or
I think when I first started coming into hip hop, really was kind of that another golden age in music genres was the '90s, is when I
Yeah.
really started. I was like, wow, well, this music is something.
Yeah.
This music is not only good, but now that I'm really listening to it, it has something that
Some
speaks
substance.
to me. You
Good.
know.
Yeah.
And by that time, I was about 16, 17. Well, I was 17 years old, and I had just joined the military at that age. In 1989, you could still join the military at 17 years old, and that's when I
Right.
joined.
Wow.
And
Wow.
I left LA for a number of years. I didn't realize how long I was going to be away, and I went to the East Coast. And that was right at the time when the whole East Coast, West Coast battle, Bad Boy Records versus Death Row Records, all
Wow.
that was
Right.
starting to happen. And it was
Wow.
the golden age of, the whole hip hop cruise. You don't really see that no more. You had Native Tongues,
Yeah.
you had So Def Crew, and you had these crews with all these rappers, in it.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
even remember the names. All of them. I
Yeah.
think EPMD had their own crew, the Hit Squad.
Yeah.
And
Squad,
those kind of crews, and it was
Wu-Tang Clan.
exactly this crew against that crew. Then it was East Coast against West Coast, and I was on that side of the country at that time, and I was. I'm like, hey, I'm from California, and everybody I knew there was like from over there, so
Oh,
it was
really?
kind of
Wow.
So
Well,
you were the bad guy.
you served as Navy?
Oh yeah, I started on the Navy, and and well, my connection to that period in my life, to the music that I do play now and I love and enjoy so much now with Caribbean and Jamaican music, it had a lot to do with that time period in my life because I was stationed on the East Coast.
Okay.
I was in the Navy, and
So were you in North Carolina?
no, I was in Florida.
Oh,
I was in
Florida.
Florida.
That's even better. Yeah.
So when I got there to the city where my first command was, I was in North Florida, and there's just being that it's Florida, just where it's located, there's a lot of Caribbean people
Oh
there,
yeah.
and then not only that, because of where it was located, there was a lot of Caribbean people in the military with me also,
Mm.
Jamaicans and people from other islands in the Caribbean, and I got a chance to really get to know these people, personal friends that I feel really blessed to have got to know, and people that to this day I will call my friends that I
Wow.
went through thick and thin with in some of the most uncertain times, going off to war in distant lands with these people,
Wow.
So
by my side.
were you into reggae before you joined the military, or was it actually while you were in the military that you got into reggae?
Okay, so I guess I got to rewind. I guess I'm getting a little head in the in
We
the
love
st-
rewind.
in
Yeah.
the in the story here. So going back. So
Let me ask you like this, because you're touching on something that we could all, we're about the same age, and we all kind of. What was the foundational thing? Because you mentioned how your parents, Earth, Wind, and Fire. For me, it would be classic rock
Yeah.
or Latin rock. But for you, what was the foundational music that got you started? What got you into music more than what your parents, what you were raised on? What was the pivotal music that got you to turn this way and go this way with this type of music?
okay,
You mentioning hip hop, you're mentioning punk rock, but what was the stuff that Supa K liked that made you search and dig for it?
it was a transformation that happened for me in a very short amount of time. We're talking like I don't know what, 86, 87 or so. I was in and around punk here in the South Bay area. That's when clubs like Fenders were big, in downtown Long Beach, the Fender Ballroom, and I mean any big name punk band you could think of was passing through there. But that was such a center of ground for a lot of subcultures, including reggae music. There was a
Mm.
lot of reggae bands and even ska bands, from the two tone ska era from the 80s that used to move through that venue, and it was all ages. I don't think a place like that could even exist in this day and age. I mean, it was just crazy. People who were around my age who had ever got a chance to go to Fenders, you could see so many great acts and bands. So a lot of them moved on to bigger and better things, like No Doubt. I
Wow.
remember seeing No Doubt when like at a young
Yeah.
age there when they were like nobody. I mean, they were nobody. Who's this? Who's this girl up here dancing around? And Gwen Stefani went on to go do big things
Wow.
on her own now.
Wow.
But and a lot of big punk bands too. But I was around that, and then at the same time, simultaneously, I guess I was just always kind of in the right place at the right time for music. I guess here in LA, um, the whole mod ska soul scene, it was kind of nearing its end, really. Getting when you got to 86, 87, but I got in that scene at that time, and it had a lot of parallels to punk as far as venues and just the places that a lot of us would frequent. And I started taking an interest in that. So to answer the question the most easiest way, I guess my next evolution in that whole musical interest, as I was exploring more and more about different kind of music. So it was probably my first intro into what I would call reggae music, that and the level which has carried me till today was probably the two-tone, the English
Okay.
two-tone
Yes.
two-tone ska scene, which in the mid to late 80s, that was a real big thing here in LA. I mean, it was huge. That was a
Yes.
really huge thing. I mean, even a local two-tone ska bands for a stage show, even at a local venue. I mean, you're talking like 200 and 300 people, easy,
Mm.
Yes.
easy. I mean, just guaranteed,
Wow.
guaranteed. That's how big that was, and people would go come scootering from, I mean, like miles away. I mean, it was
Right.
crazy the distances that some of these people would come to riding scooters, Italian vintage scooters. I mean, that's
Yeah.
that's still a side thing that I'm really
Wow.
into to this day. But I was there and I was part of that. And that's actually where I started branching out, going from the English version, their version with two tone ska, the specials. And those of you who aren't familiar with two tone, it was like the specials, the selector, madness, those kind of groups like that.
Yes.
And
Okay.
then through those groups of that time, I started discovering that, hey, you know what? This is not the original song that this is not it. These people are playing a version. You know, they would give credits even on their album covers and stuff like that to the original artist. And then I started reading these sleeve notes and these credits, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, who's that?
Yeah.
What is this? You know, and
Yeah.
then that's when I started digging. I started thinking, and I started digging deeper. And then at that time, I had kind of like officially transformed into my, I guess you call it, my first venture into subcultures, and I became a traditional skinhead. You know, at that
Mm.
time, and you know, there was a whole lot going on in LA with that, you know, Geraldo Rivera, the Donahue show, and
Yeah.
just all this crazy stuff that was going on with that. And as far as the way the media viewed that subculture, you know, but the focus for me was on music. And, you
Mhm.
know, that was my
Okay.
first venture into Jamaican music,
Mhm.
you know, and for the traditional skinhead scene, which was kind of always on the peripheral of the mod ska soul scene, there was always part of that, well, at least back in those days that was that the skinhead traditional skinhead subcult was always around that. You know, that was what we listened to. We listened to
Yeah.
that. We listened to Jamaican music. I mean, old Jamaican music on vinyl with all of these labels, Beverly Studio One, Treasure Isle. You know, that's what we wanted. And there was the excuse me, there was the stores, and there was the, how would I put it, the infrastructure to support that here at that time. Also, for anybody who loved that music, you know, there was places like the Culture Beat record store in Long Beach. Big
Yes.
up Culture
Yes.
Beat. Courtney, he's back in Jamaica these days. And there were the venues, music venues that would support that too. You know, as far as getting the artists here to LA. And that time LA still had a pretty decent sized Caribbean Jamaican community. You know, so because of the size of that community, all Jamaican artists would come here, you know, original Jamaican
Wow.
artists. You know, I mean Justin Hines, Desmond Decker, you would see Alton Ellis
Now this is
coming here.
all
This is
pre
like,
Bob Marley
Wow.
show.
yeah,
Pre
yeah,
Bob.
See, I never
yeah.
knew that these different like subcultures actually shared music together. I thought maybe skinheads here listen to Suicidal Tendency because I really didn't know much about it. And I thought maybe Rastafarians just listen to, you know, reggae or I didn't know that it was mod and ska. It was all mixed together. I'm
The-
learning something
Yeah.
here.
Oh yeah,
I never knew that.
At that time, that it was a pretty unified scene. You know, as far as you could go to a venue where it'd be a mod ska soul night, and you would hear, I mean, rare Northern Soul, Motown kind of things right alongside of original Jamaican Foundation artists. You know,
Wow.
you would hear that all in the same place,
Hand in
and
hand.
everybody in those venues would enjoy all of those different kind of musics back to
Wow.
back, side by side, all equally.
Oh, lovely.
You know,
Mm.
that's the way it was, and that's kind of where you know I became very used to being in and around that, and I just was so naive because I was so young. I thought that everywhere,
How old were you? How old
every
were you
city
at
in the
this
United States
age?
was like that. Wow, what was I? 15,
15.
15, 16. Yeah, I was about 15.
Did they
'cause,
have groups like, you know, they have promoters like, you know, they have DJ groups? Were there clubs or groups or?
there was, you know, two locally. One was right here, actually, where they would throw some of those kind of events was right here at the Waters Club, right here
Oh
in
yeah,
San
yeah.
Pedro. They used
You're
to
right. I remember that.
they used to have ska shows there.
Yeah.
The one of the last ska shows I remember seeing there was actually Desmond Decker. I saw Desmond Decker
Wow.
like
And
right
Pedro.
there,
Dancing
right there when I
Waters.
was a kid at the
Wow.
Waters Club,
Right.
and you know, and the artists would come through and to support that, and then we had the two tone, but all of that was all in the same thing, you know, and it was really big, and there was so many different aspects of that subculture and that movement that I really enjoyed. I mean, there was clothes, music, scooters. I
Yeah,
mean, and
fashion.
you know, there was, it was all encompassing. You know, it was a whole new world to me, and I
Yeah.
was only like 13, 14 years old. I mean, well, 15, 16 years old, and at that time.
Now, were you collecting records at this time?
At that time, I was not collecting. No, I had a few. You know, the one that I always give tribute to was the Club Ska
Oh, yeah.
67 compilation.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
that
Guns and
record. You know,
Navarone.
if I could give any credit to one single record in my whole life that probably influenced me more in what I do today and what I listen to today, it was that record.
Yes.
That one.
What is that now? What exactly is that?
That was the title of it was Club Ska 67. I think it was it's put out on Trojan label.
I want to say Trojan.
Yeah,
Yes.
it was put out on Trojan label, so it was all of like the biggest traditional
Compilation.
ska and
All the anthems. It had Guns and Navarone on
Guns and
there. Has,
Navarone, just
so many good
Actually, a
tunes on
few that
there.
I actually have in this small stack here right next to me. There was a few that were on
Okay.
that, and
Now that originally came out on the Whirl label, or
that I don't know.
okay.
As
Yeah.
long as I own that.
I remember trying to pick that up, and I was like, man, but I want the original copy, and if I'm not mistaken, could be wrong, but I know that, what I may be thinking of, Scabadoo. Is that Scabadooda or something like that? The yellow and red label.
That one I don't know.
Yeah, that one was on Whirl, and I remember like I just wanted it on Whirl, So because it was, I think that was between that one and Club Ska 67 were like one of the earlier, really influential. I think it was Scabby Doo or something like that, or Scabadooda or something like that. Real early records. I'm surprised you don't know that one, Ron. I feel honored that I'm stumping you right now.
Yeah, you got me on that one. There was another one that I remember, and this was Trojan. There's no doubt about that. It was the 20 Reggae Classics, and it had a checkered album. It had a checkered album.
That's
cover.
a Trojan
there
label
was a
there.
black and white label one. There were a few that came out in that
ones.
series, but the black and white label one, the 20 Reggae Classics, those two records are probably the most influential out of any kind of music in my whole life that I've ever liked or listened to. Probably the most influential out of anything, any record in music.
So you said you had a couple records at this time, 13, 15 years old. Those are records that you purchased yourself, or were they records that your parents had or your mother had purchased for you at that time?
Oh, I don't know, maybe my experience is a little different. I'd beg, plead, and cry for money for my grandfather or my mom to be able to go to Sam Goody's or Tower Records to get, to go over there to see what I wanted. I think the thing about that time in my life and that day and age was, you had a lot of places that actually had physical brick and mortar music stores too. So many. I mean, not just the big ones like Sam Goody and Tower Records. You even had so many indie shops, even here in our local area here, in the San Pedro area. There was so many just to support whatever kind of music you were into, and I feel really lucky and blessed to have grown up in that time and era when music was so accessible and different kind of music was so accessible. You could go to these places any day of the week and find something new, or something you were interested in,
Yeah.
So let me ask you something real quick, because I'm learning right now. Thinking back to that era, what were some of the big labels that you can remember that were influential to you in your life? Like, because I don't really know these labels myself, so I wanted you to share with the listener. What are some of those labels?
Okay, well, shoot, let's see.
That's a great question.
I think to start with, in the beginning, probably one of the biggest was the Two Tone label out of England, and then as I started to branch out into authentic Jamaican music, probably the Trojan label. Even to this day, they put out a lot of music. Even back in those days, they were putting on a lot of presses, and they were putting out even other formats, even on cassette, and then later CD and things like that. But they were putting on a lot. So I think to start with, those were probably two of the labels that I would.
So this is 90s, 80s, 90s.
Well, by the 90s, I was gone. So we're talking about the late 80s.
Okay, yeah, 80s.
And at that time, what we were seeing also is you were seeing, well, I was seeing, what I remember, we were starting to see a lot of original press represses or original Jamaican LPs starting to be made. I don't know if those, I don't know even to this day if those were coming out of Jamaica, or if they were coming out of New York. But there was a whole bunch of original represses coming out at that time too. So the music was accessible. You had to go find it and search for it, obviously. But it was there if you wanted it, and that's really what you wanted to hear, and you were into that. You could still find it. I mean, with places like Culture Beat, and then so many other Jamaican and Caribbean music stores around LA. Scorcher Records. I used to go down there. I remember catching the bus way over to like Slauson and Western to go to the original Scorcher Records.
Is that linked up with Scorcher label?
Oh yeah, Scorcher label. He used to be here in here in LA, and I used to catch the bus there. Barton Records. I mean, you say Barton Records to anybody who was around in that time. Yeah, that was it.
Wow.
What were some of the other big ones? We're talking like pre-Amoeba days here. Rhino Records was another big one.
Remember that one?
Aaron Records,
Aaron Records,
yeah.
Gold Boy Records.
International Records, which was a strictly Jamaican Caribbean store. It was on Crenshaw.
So have you? And I know you said you were into punk, you were into hip hop, and into reggae. Had you only collected reggae, or did you start collecting other genres as well when you started collecting?
Well, I think as far as collecting, I think maybe I would like to make the distinction. I don't really I don't really consider when I say collecting like my cassette collecting. I guess that's considered collecting these by today's standards. If you were into that or you have those still. But I had a lot of cassettes, and they were Jamaican music cassettes
Oh,
also. I had a
okay.
lot of that. So and that when we're talking about that, we're still talking about the days when pre-internet days, when you had to order music
Yeah.
and you couldn't hear it. You just had to know the label, you had to know the artist,
For
and
reals.
you had to get
For reals.
order from a
Catalog.
type written like just list.
Yeah.
Right.
It had the name of the song, had the artist, and then it had the
Mhm.
price, and you don't know if it's good. You can't you couldn't
Yeah.
check on your phone to see
Yeah.
on
Nope.
YouTube or something to see what it sounded like.
And you had to
just-
wait to get it in the mail.
that too,
Yeah. So I'm assuming
Those
you bought one cassette and they send you a catalog to that cassette or to that label.
Yeah, exactly. Or
Oh.
sometimes with some of the records, the different ones, they would you'd buy something and they'd send you something free, check this
Oh,
out,
okay.
check this out too.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. I don't know if that was just a ploy.
Was
to
there
get
a
you to buy
venue
those.
called Pegasus? I'm trying to remember back in the day. Does that ring a bell?
That I don't know.
Okay.
That I don't know.
The record shop.
So moving along as far as my music taste and things like that, I joined the military at a young age of 17, and then I was stationed in Florida, and I came into contact and I became friends with a lot of Caribbean people that I was stationed with, and then in and around the city of Jacksonville. And I was only 17. I was right about 17, 18 years old when I first joined the military and left the state of California in LA. And when I got there, that was probably my first real taste of Caribbean and Jamaican culture. I had a friend, I always remember him. He was an older guy, older petty officer. His name was Val. And he was from Barbados, and he was very involved with the Caribbean community in the city. He was in the military with me, but he was very involved with the Caribbean community in the town of Jacksonville. And we became good friends, over time. And, one evening I was sharing music with him. We were just talking, and I was sharing some of my cassettes of ska and rocksteady. He kind of really took an interest. Like, wow, you listen to that? You're into that? You're like,
Wow.
yeah. He's like, yeah, and I know these artists. I love these artists. These are this kind of music I grew up listening to. I'm like, wow, cool. So I said, well, here, you can use these cassettes and borrow them, give them back to me. And he leveled with me one night. He's like, look, hey man, look, when we get back to Jacksonville, because we were out at sea, we're somewhere else, I don't know. And he's like, hey man, look, when we get back, if you wanna go have a good time, go to a Caribbean Jamaican party, you just let me know. And he was personal friends with the biggest Jamaican reggae club in Jacksonville.
Wow.
He's like, look, man, you just go over there and you tell them you know me. He's like, you don't gotta wait in line. You don't gotta pay. You just tell them you know me. I was like, nah, this sounds too
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
This sounds too good to be true. It's like, this guy don't got that kind of juice,
Yeah.
And I went over there. Sure enough, I went over there. I ventured over there by myself into the north side of Jacksonville. It was a club called the Rolex. It was off limits for military. We weren't supposed to be there at
Oh,
all. 'Cause
really?
this is you're talking now 1990, 91 when Jamaican music was rough.
Wow.
I'm talking rough. I
Okay.
mean,
Okay.
you're talking about the golden era of gun tune lyric kind of
Okay.
thing.
Yes.
It was rough. It was a rough time even in Jamaican music, and that place had all of the same things going on there in that club. We weren't supposed to go there, but I went there anyway.
Yeah.
Ah.
Being a young naive kid from LA who just wanted to hear reggae music, So I
exactly.
went over there and I was like, okay, let me check this out. So I go up there and I told the bouncer, I'm like, hey, my friend Val sent me here, and then he went and got the owner the owner came out. I was like, my friend Val sent me over here, and he said that I can, come in because I wasn't even old enough. I was
Oh,
70.
I
I was
see.
I was 17 years old at the time. I wasn't even old enough to drink beer on the base at that time.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh man, yeah, man." He opened the rope. Yeah, yeah, come in, come.
Wow.
I mean, like VIP treatment. And I walked
Wow.
in there. He's like, and so he's like, "What do you want?" And so I started pulling out money. He says, "No, man, your money's no good here, man."
Wow.
He said, "Whatever you want. You want to eat, you want to drink, whatever. You just tell me." But that experience, that night started that experience of a pretty regular thing I was doing there in
Mm.
Jacksonville. But man, during that time, I saw so many big sound systems of the day move
Wow.
through that club
Yes.
over the weekends. I saw Black Cat,
Wow.
Mm.
Kilimanjaro,
Dang.
Stone Love. I mean, I saw all of them coming through there, over different consecutive weekends. And
Wow.
Now,
that's a memory that will forever
Can you remember the
be.
name? Did that place have a name? That
It
venue?
was
the
the
Rolex.
Rolex.
Is that what I'm
It,
saying?
it was
Oh.
it the name changed it changed names a couple times, but
Okay.
it was essentially the same place, the Rolex. And
You touched on something, and me personally, I know what it is, but a lot of people may not know what it is. And of course, you're from Aero Sound, and I I would like for you to, if you can, just elaborate on what exactly a sound system is. Where did it start? What is it about? Give us
oh, okay,
any
sure,
information
of
on that,
course.
because a lot of people may not understand when you say sound system. We think of our speakers and our amplifiers and mixers and stuff,
Yeah.
coming to set up, but which actually is a big portion of what it is. But it gets a little deeper than that, I think.
Sometimes I guess I'm so used to being in and around Jamaican music or Caribbean music, I don't think about that, how foreign that term may sound to some people, sound system. But sound
Yes.
system basically is a DJ crew, I guess, to put it in a more English American kind of
Yeah.
translation. It's a DJ crew, and they basically form what's referred to in patois, or I guess Jamaican language, as a sound. And what they do is they basically try to create a signature sound that when audience members or fans come to listen to their sound, they can expect a certain quality of music that they're listening to. They can expect always to hear certain associated artists that are associated with that sound system.
Mm.
Wow.
And then even the DJs themselves, or in proper Jamaican or patois, the selector, the selectors even kind of take on a celebrity status of their own. I guess no
Right.
different than American hip hop DJs in that way.
Mhm.
I guess we don't really have that big of a thing nowadays.
Yeah.
But they take on their own personality, and on the mic, and controlling the crowd and what music they play. And they form what are called sounds. Now that, I mean, that there's a lot of history behind it that goes back even further than that, to like the late 1950s in Jamaica, when sound systems
Yes.
were a way to promote Jamaican music and Caribbean music that was being produced on the islands, from local artists and Jamaican artists, because the at that time the radios would not play Jamaican music or Caribbean music.
Mm.
They
Wow.
would not. They found the major radio stations found that music to still be offensive, and I guess kind
Yeah.
of primitive, kind of compared to
Yeah.
more gentrified music that they would prefer to. So the way to promote that was through the sound systems. And so sound systems have a lot of integral history with Jamaican music as ways to get that music out to the public. That
Right.
didn't change. That still hasn't really changed even to this day. You still have big, some very old sound systems that still exist, and new artists that are trying to get their name known to the listeners of this music. They still give their recordings to these sound systems, these DJ crews, to get them to play it on their big sound systems. When I'm talking big sound systems, when you're talking about Jamaican sound systems, you're talking about massive,
Yeah.
Walls.
massive walls
Yeah.
of speakers,
Whole
and
city rocks.
that's that that you could feel the bass in your chest. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm that big. I mean, California has a few here and there, but there's still nothing that I've seen as big as some of the sound systems in Florida, or
Right.
or in
Yeah, they go deep in Florida,
in
right?
Jamaica,
Yeah.
in the Caribbean. I mean, big, huge things. To blast this music for. I mean, you can hear some of it for miles outside of the venue, because they're usually outdoor in the Caribbean. It doesn't. Um, well, during the summer it's very hot, you know, and there's not big enough indoor venues to put this kind of
Wow.
speaker system up, you know, and you can
Wow.
hear this music for miles
The next city over.
out in the countries, you know, and there's no limits on that there.
Yeah.
You know, parties go till the sun comes up. When the sun comes up, that's when it's time to go home. You know,
Okay.
that kind of thing,
Yeah.
that kind of thing, you know, and
Yeah.
you
So
know,
so I know you touched on that's foundational sound right there. I mean, when
Yeah.
you talk about that, and I know you touched on the sound system, which is actually like a club of DJs or a group of DJs that act as one unit. And now I know about Dubplates, and I think it's important that we talk about that. I personally love the fact that artists are actually open to doing this as an extra source of funding, for their music career, because it gets even more political with the fact that they weren't getting money off the record companies themselves. There was no contracts being signed right back then. If you're a reggae artist and you recorded a song, it was kind of an hourly wage thing in certain circumstances, correct?
there's a few parts to your question. I'll start with just the dub plates. So what a dub plate is, it used to be known in Jamaican music industry terminology. It used to be called a special a long time ago, a special.
Yes.
And so what a special basically is it was the unique recording that an artist, Jamaican music artist, would record specifically for the sound system of their preference. And usually, what the lyrics, well, the way that it would be laid out is the lyrics would be basically promoting the sound or the DJ crew. And when you listen to the lyrics, what they usually were, most specials, they were versions of already popular songs where the lyrics had been altered to
Right.
voice to put the lyrics in a way to promote the sound.
Hmm.
You know, so that's where that started. And it actually goes back a little further than that, because the first specials were never even pressed. It comes from a live sound system performance when
Wow.
sounds would then the mic, whoever was controlling the mic at the time would grab the mic, kind of like in hip hop, and
Right.
big up the crew, big up the sound, big up the venue or whoever maybe was sponsoring the party or whatever, or the event. And so what eventually happened as it progressed is they started actually recording versions of what they would do live at the time in a dance hall or in a dance or in an event. And that's where you started seeing, as the music progressed, the first pressings of what we now know as dub plates.
Mm.
And it evolved. It's an evolution from that, just the live mic man chat in a real event, a real dance, And so, the dub plate industry, I guess if we could call it that, is like you said, it's where today artists will record very specific special songs or versions just for the sound system of their preference. And it is a way that a lot of Jamaican artists in this day and age, in the digital age, they supplement their income, because a
Yeah.
lot, due to file sharing and things like that, and contract, issues and things like that, a lot of Jamaican artists don't get paid most of the time, which is actually rather historic for the music that they actually record for a lot of labels.
Mm.
Wow.
Even Jamaican based labels. The way that system had worked in that industry for so long is that in Jamaica, I guess it was really no different here with black music in America, but the artists would get paid basically a one time fee for just recording the song, and any royalties that came thereafter did not belong to them. They belonged to the label.
Mm.
And it was no different in Jamaican music. And you would get or maybe it was a little different in Jamaican music, because they would actually pay the artist. Some labels were known for paying the artist by the day. They would just pay them
Wow.
in whatever they recorded. Whether it was 5 songs, 10 songs, 20 songs, 30 songs, it made no difference. They would just get one flat rate,
Wow.
and that's it. And if one of those turned out to be a great hit that sold a million, 2 million copies, that was it. That didn't belong to the artist.
Yeah.
That belonged to the label.
Label.
And
That's called a work made for hire contract.
Oh, really?
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So
What exactly is a work
just
made for hire contract?
Pay him to come in, play with the bass or do vocals, and then the label takes the risk.
Wow. And they still do that today.
They still do it today. Yep.
Wow.
And there's you when you listen to interviews on YouTube or whatever of these a lot of these older foundation Jamaican artists, you hear stories like that come up every so often about some of the the bigger, more prominent labels, about how the owners would do things like that. And some of these hits and songs that these artists would make, they would become big hits in Europe and they wouldn't even know,
Wow.
because we're talking pre-internet days here for a
Yep.
lot of this music, and they'd be number one hits, let's say in London, and this artist would be still in Jamaica, and the music had been sold over there, and they didn't
Not
even
even
know
know.
that they
Yeah.
got a number one hit on the BBC list or whatever that is. They had
Mhm.
Top of the Pops or whatever over there, and there's a lot of stories like that, of artists getting
Yep.
slighted, never getting really their fair share or
Yep.
or due monetarily or even just with recognition that, hey, this was the artist who made that number one or
Hmm.
song over here in Europe. There was a lot of that going on, and I guess that was kind of common with American music too. In
Yes.
a lot of ways, I've heard stories of the histories of different labels, even here in America, where that kind of thing happened. It's really sad, to hear that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
That's what makes these 45s, these 7-inch records so unique, though, is that was just a one-time thing for some of these artists.
Mhm.
So the record is sold. I know some of these songs you played on our prior show are probably worth a lot of money then. So how was someone like Super K? How you finding these records when they're so rare and so limited? Where you looking to find these at?
early on when I started getting my music together to start to form Arrow Sound, it was still at a time when I could find a lot of these first or earlier pressing copies of a lot of the music that I still play today. And today in 2020, what I've seen happen over the last decade or so is that we're seeing labels now from Japan, even here in America, like Heartbeat and Soul Jazz, to name a couple. They're doing repressings of a lot of original Jamaican music. They're doing it on vinyl and then re-releasing in different formats, digital and it was CDs for a while, So that I can really appreciate that as a fan
Yeah.
of this music, because that can allow new generations of fans and people who like this music and who love this music like myself to experience and listen to a lot of it, that some of which was not even as widely distributed as it is today, even when it came out like so many decades ago, when
Hmm.
distribution was limited back in those days. We're talking like the 1960s, 1970s. You
Yeah.
see some of these songs, some of these artists now more widely distributed even from when the original recording was released. Nowadays, just due to all the different technology and things we have
Yeah.
now, So I can appreciate that.
Most definitely.
I love being a collector myself and being into reggae, being into all sorts of genres, but reggae is one of the only genres that I've ever found records where it was actually a cereal box turned inside out with a silk screening of the album cover.
Yeah.
So they would pretty much just use anything as a resource to
Wow.
to put the record cover in,
Oh,
right? I mean,
the ingenuity of the Jamaican music industry, there's no end to that. I
Mm.
mean, some of the things that I've seen and I've heard of myself, of some of the different ways they distribute and put these records together. The one that I'm quite familiar with, just due to the music that I own, is in the 80s, in the late, actually probably even earlier than that, in the 70s, the pressing plants in Jamaica started to shut down. Maybe
Mm.
it's more like the 80s. They started to shut down because the demand for vinyl was going down, and then the other thing about it was the technical support to keep those pressing plants running.
Wow.
It was just wasn't there anymore because people weren't buying or listening to records anymore, and they weren't making any new pressing machines for vinyl.
Wow.
And so, with that, most of the machines and that equipment became obsolete just due to the fact that they didn't have parts for it anymore. They to
Mm.
fix it. They had to make parts. There was a point where they were having to make parts, machine the parts
Yeah.
to keep those things running. I guess just in that time, it wasn't cost effective anymore. When we started seeing other formats coming out and becoming more popular, like cassettes and CDs and things like that,
Yeah.
and so the plants started to shut down shut down, one at a time until towards the end there, and I don't even know if it's still running when there was only one pressing plant left on the island,
Wow.
and that was it. All of the rest of it had been scrapped or sold off and taken out of the country or whatever. I don't know, but
I know you bring up a good point. I know you and I have talked about this before. As for any reggae DJ, we all know that the vinyl is very, how could I say, not great quality. I know a lot of pitted records, a lot of dull records.
oh yeah,
Like, can you elaborate on that? I know
oh
we had talked before about this on the
oh yeah.
recycling of old
Yeah,
vinyl.
that's Jamaican ingenuity at work again there. Just one more example. So what had happened, and this is I mean, there's maybe listeners out there who might know more of the details about what I've heard and what I know about that. In that there was a point there, probably in the 80s, mid 80s to late 80s, maybe even into the early 90s, when old dead stock records that was still in shops and still in the distribution warehouses on the shelves that had never been sold off. Well, what they started doing was they started taking those records and they started melting the material down to
Wow.
press, to turn it back into its raw form to press new records out of. And so what collectors and DJs who were buying those later press copies were getting, and I have too many of them to even count, but
Yeah.
we were getting a lesser quality vinyl record out of that, and one of the telltale signs that that was a record made out of that recycled vinyl material was the kind of signature telltale little pits and
Yes.
bubbles that you would see sometimes on the. I'm looking at one like right here in front of me where that was a product of that kind of that time, but it has it's just kind of a thing, and I guess one of the good things about it, I guess if you could call it that, is that if you find a record like the one I'm looking at right now at this moment, you see those pits in there, you can tell one thing for sure, that that is an original Jamaican pressing, because nobody else was doing that
That's
nowhere in
funny.
the world, so
What do you have on the table right
I
now?
have a Beverly's label record repress, and for some reason or another, it has a handwritten label on it. I don't know. That's kind of interesting to see. That somebody, or think about that somebody in a factory somewhere in Jamaica was actually, their job
Handwriting
was to
this.
write the name of the record on there. That was their
Wow.
job, and but it's Jimmy Cliff, and it's one of his earliest songs on the Beverly label. It's on Miss Jamaica, and this song brings back a lot of good memories, because the first time I ever heard this song was actually on from a movie in the 80s. It was called Scandal. It was a British movie,
Hmm.
and it was a true story about Christine Keeler. And those of you who are Skylights fans know that the Skylights had put out a song about this woman. And this song was a true life person. Her name was Christine Keeler, and she caused a big scandal in the British government, and almost brought down the British government, because she was
Wow.
dating like a Russian spy, as well as like somebody in the parliament in the UK at the same
Wow.
time.
Dang.
And but anyway, they made a movie about her life, and it was called Scandal. But one of the things in the 80s when I saw this movie, I was probably about, I don't know, 13, 14 years old, is that it had a killer soundtrack. I mean, killer. I mean, that soundtrack in that movie could not have came out at a better time for me as far as the music that I liked. I mean, even to this day, I mean, I have a copy of it in my on CD in my truck. I mean, that's how
Nice.
much I like even to this day. And this was one of the songs in that movie. And one of the things I appreciate about the movie, if you ever get a chance to catch it, is that it showed the London Jamaican community at that time, or a reenactment of it,
Right, right.
in that movie. And that's something that at that time you never seen portrayed on
Wow.
film at all.
Especially London, right?
Exactly. And it's that very specific time and that very specific part of that community and of that city, and the one of the scenes is where Christine Keeler, the actress who's playing her, she's actually in a Jamaican club, and they're playing, all ska, and and the soundtrack is just killer. And this is one of the songs that was actually off that one of my favorite movies. It was Miss Jamaica by Jimmy Cliff. So let me play a couple seconds of that and check this out.
Roses are red, violets are blue. Believe me, I
Yeah.
love you.
You can definitely hear the pits.
Apart, 'cause you're the rose of my heart, and a sweet rose, you are my queen. You're my Miss Jamaica, my Miss Jamaica. You're my Miss Jamaica. I'm crowning you myself.
Definitely can hear
Yeah.
the quality of that
Yeah,
record there, man.
big tune though. Big. That's a young Jimmy Cliff right there. You know, went on to make so many big songs over the years. But that was him at the start. You could just hear how young he is in his voice right there on
I
that
really
tune.
love that. I love that about artists with in any genre. Just Frank and I had talked about this before. It's the young artists, that voice that they have, and it's the ones that come straight out of the slums, straight out of poverty, straight out of the hood, the ghetto, that have that passion. That it's just, you can't make that passion up. You can't make that kind of music. You know, it's something about that. It's just, it grabs me by my heart, and the younger vocals
I
is
agree.
another thing.
You know, I think another thing that song really contains for me, just knowing the history of the music and the history of some of the history of the island of Jamaica, is that song really, to me, kind of encompasses and includes the sound of the birth of a new nation. Because Jamaica had just recently gained their independence when that song was made, and they had not only a new country, independent country, but now they had a new music that was all their own.
Wow.
It later, much later, became collectively known as reggae music, but that's where it started. At
Wow.
that point, when that music was being pressed and that music was being recorded, it was when that country had gained independence from England. So I mean, there was a lot of hope there. There
Hmm.
was a lot of joy that they had just been freed from the shackles of the British Empire. Now they could make their own decisions and everything like that as far as a country and where they wanted to go. And you hear that in that music. You hear that there's some hope there now. To the Jamaican people, they saw the light at the end of the tunnel, and I mean, we kind of know now that it kind of didn't work out in the end, I guess, till today that well. But that's where they were at. At that point in time, and you hear it.
Yeah.
With that music. But
Yeah, so I know we're coming close
oh,
to
okay.
the end of the show
All
here,
right.
but I know that you have another record here, and you were talking earlier about two-tone ska. And for a lot of people who may not know what two-tone ska is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, this looks like a specials record here that you got, correct? Yeah, well, why don't you tell me a little bit about this record?
Well, the two tone movement was strictly English, and it came out of the Jamaican community influence from Jamaican expatriates who had moved during the Windrush generation to England and to London specifically. And they a lot of the young people of that age, of we're talking like the late 50s to early 60s, they began to be influenced by Jamaican Caribbean culture, including the music. And what you saw later in the early 80s was you saw this music taking form in the influence taking form in a new form of ska music, Jamaican music, Caribbean music, called two-tone ska. That's what we refer to it kind of collectively as today. I mean, it was different, but it was strictly English. That was where it kind of separated. It was strictly English, and
Mm.
there was a lot of groups that came out of this. It was combined with a kind of a punk sound, kind of a more modern twist on classic
Yeah.
Jamaican music. The song that I'm gonna play now was probably one of towards the towards the real tail end of that two tone movement. There was a very popular band called the Specials. They went on to form form other bands that went by different names, but one of the last formations of the members of that band, kind of loosely called the Specials, was the Specials, aka. And this song represents for me a real transformation for me, because I think you hear more of a more Jamaican or real true Jamaican sound in this, um apart from the two-tone ska sound. And this for me also kind of ushered in for me a new influence also, going moving from ska to rocksteady, and my love for that music, to a more roots and more current sounding Jamaican music at the time. So let me play a little bit of this so you can check it out. Then The one thing I like about this song really is the drumming. The drumming on this is absolutely amazing. This was the original drummer from the Specials, so check this out. See that carry right there, man. I see it. That's kind of.
Be it your sister, be it your brother, be it your cousin or your uncle or your lover. If you have a racist friend, now is the time, now is the time for your friendship to end. Be it your best friend or any other. Is it your husband or your father or your mother?
What year is this right here, Supa K?
I think we're looking at right about 80, probably right about 85, 86
Okay.
when this came out. And
I know.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I know you had said earlier, you when you mentioned two-tone ska, you were talking about, if I'm not mistaken, Skinhead came up, right?
Yeah.
Okay. When I think of Skinhead, right away I think racism, negative, groups that are against anti. Yeah. So, but it wasn't until I got into reggae that I realized that that's not exactly how it started with Skinheads. Correct? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
That's kind of the controversy with when people hear the word skinhead or talking about that subcult. That's kind of a yes and no answer, because to start with, no, absolutely no. The skinhead culture came out of what was the mod culture of the 60s. And the mod culture, for those of you who don't know what that was, these were English kids, English working class kids who were really all about fashion of the day, and they were about listening to black music, and not all forms, but primarily American black music, soul, Motown, Stax, these kind of labels and things like that. And they also listened to early Jamaican music, because Jamaicans were then an integral part of the community then, and out of that outcropped the first skinheads. They were basically the younger siblings of the mods who were around during the early to mid 60s. And then later on, when you started to get to the late 60s, early 70s, you started the subculture are totally transformed, and there was racism involved. There's no doubt about that. There were skinheads who were being recruited to become part of the National Front, which is kind of their equivalent to the KKK in the UK. And at that point, you were getting traditional skinheads who were actually fighting with these new skinheads who were out now, and they were racist. There's no doubt about that. But to start with, no, absolutely not. No, they listened to strictly black music, and they not only that, they admired their Jamaican counterparts who they lived side by side with in those working class communities. That's what they were all about. These were people who were on their equal. These were their peers. But so that's not a real easy answer to that one. But yeah.
It's good to hear a little bit of history on that, though, because I think it's normal for many people to just assume that it's a negative thing when you have Sharps, which is Skinheads Against Racial Profiling, which to me, I mean, like I said, I never realized that it wasn't always a negative thing. But man, there's so much that we didn't touch on, Mike, Supa K, man. I know there's a lot of stories. I know there's a lot of history. I love reggae music. You're like a walking book. You know what I mean?
That's like one of the great things about this music is there's the music, and then there's the stories of the people who made it, and the people who were influenced by it too. There's just so much. There's just so much out there these days, thanks to the internet and stuff like that we can learn about this and these people who created this music too.
Well, definitely want to thank you for coming out, man. I wish we had
Oh,
more
you're welcome.
time. I really
No,
do.
my pleasure. My
Man,
pleasure.
you know, and you've blessed us so much, you know, the first time with the set and this time to come back and kick knowledge. I mean, man, I gotta have you back just
Well,
to
most
go into
definitely.
more,
Oh
you know.
man, anytime,
Yeah,
anytime.
definitely gonna
Thank you for
listen
having me
back.
on the
We
show.
learned so much. Definitely learned so much.
Is there anything you want to say to anyone out there? Any shout outs?
I would just like to thank the listeners for tuning in tonight for the show. There's bigger and better things coming out of the show, so please stay tuned. Okay, and tell all your friends about the show too.
Amen.
Yeah.
All right. Once again, Victor Bustillos,
Frank Contreras.
and we had Supa K in the studio tonight from Arrow Sound, 100.7, Bridge City Radio, KCLA.